The honourable member for Dawson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise as a representative who actually lives in an area that's classified as an interregional zone of the Australian Standard Geographical Classification Remoteness Area. I represent students in the Mackay region who are discriminated against by Labor's legislation which restricts the independent status of youth allowance. The members opposite have created a situation where students in some regional areas are treated differently to others, such as those in Mackay, when it comes to youth allowance. They've created a situation where students in different towns in the same region are treated differently when it comes to youth allowance. And they've created a situation where students on different sides of the street are treated differently when it comes to youth allowance, as the Leader of the National Party outlined in the House earlier. They have effectively created an apartheid policy in relation to youth allowance, a student apartheid. You either can get access to the independent rate of youth allowance through one set of circumstances, or you can jump through a whole heap of other hoops and hurdles, as students in Mackay have to do. And so now today we have the opportunity to do something about this disgraceful situation. But now we have the Labor Party trying to shut it down, shut the debate down, stop this debate, trying to stop the vote just in order to save face. Those opposite are very happy to put politics before students. They are happy to continue to screw students over in order to save face on this issue. What a hard-hearted bunch that these people are. These are real people that we are talking about, these students, who are affected by this atrocious situation, this student apartheid that they have created. They are real people, often from families who are struggling with rising costs of living already, wanting the best for their children, but being unable to fund their university degrees. And why would that be? Well, we could look at the University of Queensland, which outlines on its website the costs that an average student incurs. And I note that many Mackay students do find their way to Brisbane to study in degrees that aren't offered locally. UQ says a student living in shared accommodation off campus would pay approximately $14,248 a year for rent, food and utilities, and approximately $3,210 for establishment costs when setting up their accommodation. That's more than $17,000 in the first year alone. But wait, there's more. UQ goes on to mention the additional living expenses such as public transport, entertainment, telephone costs, textbooks, photocopying, clothing, and there's more. Personal access to a computer and the internet is recommended for all students. And those who need a car to get about, it can vary from anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000, and $90 a week fuel costs. That's a costly exercise for most people, particularly students. And the bill that the Coalition wants to put before this House helps those students and helps average families who are sending their students off to university. It does so by allowing students easier access to a higher rate of youth allowance, this being independent youth allowance. On this side of the House, we've all had numerous people contact our electorate offices about this apartheid situation, and I just want to draw the House's attention to two of these people in my electorate of Dawson. The first of these is 62-year-old Stephen Parker, who happens to be the father of a young daughter who has begun studying a medical degree in Townsville. She doesn't get that independent rate of youth allowance, even though by all intents and purposes she is independent. She just doesn't get it because it's too hard to get under the current arrangements. Mr Parker is going to retire in about 3 years' time, wrote to me about this matter, and towards the end of the letter he says, "I wouldn't be writing to you at all if I lived in Townsville, Brisbane, Sydney or any other capital city. My peers who live in these places have no such burdens to face, and indeed many will avail themselves of assistance as well. Living outside of these places puts extra costs on families, not to mention the additional hassles of finding accommodation, security and all the other worries of having children living away from home. Many of these costs are substantial. It is these extra costs that should be helped with by the government. Sadly, all too little consideration is given to these costs under the present scheme." For Senator Nash, who was here earlier, and all of those who are lobbying to change this, Mr Parker goes on to say that he wants to thank this side of the House for what they have done so far and continue to encourage us lobbying for these changes. I also want to mention the case of young Matthew Flaw. His father, Darryl, wrote to me about this situation, and he said Matthew completed a work placement at Team Engineering in Mackay, for which he was paid. The amount he was paid allowed him to qualify as an independent student for youth allowance purposes according to the criteria which was published on the Centrelink website at the time. Matthew finished his work placement on the 27th of June, which allowed him a few days to complete his application for youth allowance before going to Rockhampton to commence study. Using the criteria available on the Centrelink website, he completed his application and lodged it in person at the Mackay Centrelink on the morning of the 1st of July 2010. The Centrelink employee who accepted his application congratulated him on providing all the required information for independent status and advised him he would not have any trouble with qualifying. But Matthew was later advised that his claim was rejected because the rules for independence changed on the 1st of July 2010, 1 day late. And so Matthew misses out now because of the hard-heartedness of those members opposite. His family now has to scrimp and save, and no doubt Matthew has to chip in as much as he can, as much as a struggling student can, all because they created this apartheid situation. And so here now is our chance to overturn this disgraceful piece of legislation, to give Matthew Floor and Ms Parker and many other Mackay students a fair go. And I would say that members of the House have been pressured to say that this legislation that we're proposing is unconstitutional. And the opposite claim that it's unconstitutional, or that it's about appropriation, or whatever they can dredge up to try and ensure that this bill does not see the light of day. Well, not everyone on the Labor side actually agrees. The President of the Senate, Labor Senator Hogg, put the view that the bill in question does not appropriate money, and he went on to say it does not need to do so because any funds required to support the measures in the bill have already been appropriated by the Parliament in the form of a special appropriation of indefinite amount in Section 242 of the Social Security Administration Act 1999. The Clerk of the Senate has also said that Parliament has agreed to a standing or special appropriation under the Social Security Act, which is effectively given a perpetual blank cheque for payments to be made. This means that a bill to change entitlements, such as providing wider access to income support, does not need to appropriate any money because the appropriation is already in place. That is pretty much clear-cut, that this bill is not about appropriation. It is completely constitutional. There is absolutely no reason to hold this bill up. And so I say to the House, let this bill be debated. Let justice and fairness for Mackay students prevail, and let this bill pass.